Okay, so this is my process for getting a terrain from Blender into 3D Studio Max, which includes the satellite imagery. I did, in the past, I've used the Blender add-on, the Blender GIS add-on, which was good, but lately I've been using Blender OSM, which you can get the information from OpenStreetMap, and the satellite imagery comes from a different place with the GIS add-on. I think it's from memory. I think it's only Google, and you have licensing issues when you're using that information. So from OSM, you can have there's a free version and a paid version, and the paid version, obviously, you have more functionality. I've paid for it. I find that I've used it enough that it's really paid for itself. So let's go to Blender. Blender OSM is in this little side tab here. So you can select from a map where you want to get your terrain from. I'm just going to go back to my area here and look for Aylesbury, and hopefully I'll be able to find it. I'm going to type in Aylesbury to get myself into roughly the right position, and I've had to do this offline because I got a bit confused about where I was, but this section of LiDAR, I've located it on Google Earth, and I chose not to bore you with the details of how I found that, but basically I found it. This patch I've turned on intensity just to help me see a little bit better the areas that I'm looking for, and so there it is. This is the patch of wood that we can see here, the shape of this field. Cubbington is the name of the village that it's centered on. So I'm going to try and get a similar piece of terrain in Blender. Cublington. And I can actually choose to look at it by OSM or by ArcGIS. ArcGIS is obviously closer to what we need because we can select the area a bit more accurately based on the image that I want. So I'm going to select the area that I want. This will do for the sake of this exercise. So we copy the coordinates that are given to us here. We go to Blender and we paste the coordinates, and we say that we want a terrain, and we say import. Now we may not be able to see it because it's too far out, zoomed too close in, but when we zoom out we can't see the extent, so we have to change the viewport settings. I'll just add a 0 here so I can see my whole terrain. Now we want to apply a satellite image to that, so we go back to our OSM panel, and we've still got the same coordinates, so that's all good, and we need to go to the image overlay. Just a little note about the options here. In order to use these different sources for the information, the ArcGIS and the Mapbox satellite, you do have to get an API key from those websites, which the documentation for Blender OSM does take you through, so I won't go into that in great detail, but in the edit preferences for Blender OSM you can see here where you can put your token, and I've got a token for both those places, and you also have to tell it where to save, where to store downloaded files, and where to store assets which it uses to put textures on buildings that it might download for you, that sort of thing. So ArcGIS is what I'll use, and I can change the number of tiles so that the resolution improves, so you can actually dial up or down the number of tiles depending on what resolution that you want the resulting image to be. And obviously the more tiles, the higher the resolution of the image, but for the sake of this I won't go too crazy because it takes a bit of time to download. And I say import, and then we'll see that the process has started down in this corner. So I'll pause this until it's finished downloading all the image tiles. Okay, so it's finished its importing process. We can't see the satellite image yet because we're not in the right viewport shading mode, so let's change it to material preview mode, and we can see that we now have our satellite image applied to the terrain, which is great. Now we just need to save that satellite image because at the moment it's saved in a temporary location. So we have a look at UV editing mode and select, this is the image overlay that we're looking at. We want to name it something meaningful. And then we can go image, save as. I'm just saving on my desktop. And now we want to export this terrain as an FBX model. So save as FBX in desktop. We want to call it temp2 just because that's a great name. And path mode, copy and unpack. We do this so that it saves the satellite image along with the FBX terrain. And export. Now we go into Max and import the terrain. Just going to check my scale. At the moment I've got it on automatic again, and I'll see how that looks when it imports everything. Hopefully it will import it in the right scale. Well, it looks pretty much the same, doesn't it? So that might be good. And so now that we have our two terrains side by side, we could potentially use this satellite image to map onto the other one that we've already brought in from the DEFRA LiDAR. Now this will just be an eyeballing process, unfortunately, to get the satellite terrain image to match the terrain. Potentially you could make life a bit easier by getting a more accurate reference between the two, the terrain from the LiDAR and the terrain from Blender, but for the purpose of this exercise I haven't bothered to do that. Anyway, that's my process. If anybody has any other better ways of doing it, then I'd love to hear from you, and hopefully that will help some people make their lives a bit easier.